Okay, so like most newbie woodworkers, I had a case of cutting board mania. After seeing the prices of 8-quarter maple and walnut, I quickly found myself buying cutoffs and gluing them together to make some fun looking, but thin and predictable cutting boards. They were built using the normal process of ripping the strips on a table saw, aligning them into a pattern I liked, gluing them up, planing them, and doing the final sanding and oil bath. They were fun and I learned a lot. However, I wanted to make some boards that were less predictable and a little more complex. So I cross-cut my face grain boards into strips, combined 2 of them, re-glued them, and turned them into end grain boards. Since the cross-cut boards were thin, it created some great patterns. Here are a few of my favorites. I love the tight patterns and colors that are created with this cross-cut method. Let's take a look at a few specific ones, and even though this isn't a full build, I'll still give a few tips and tricks as we go. Welcome to Howdy's. Before we get into the build, we've got to do an Aggie's least favorite thing, math. As you know, we're combining 2 different cutting boards, and these boards are a little thinner. They're 3/4 of an inch thick. However, the thickness of the final end grain board is going to be determined by how wide we make the cuts. In this particular example, I recommend making them 1.5 inches. That's a great width for an end grain cutting board. As you can see from the drawing, we're taking 2 of the thinner boards and combining them into one large end grain cutting board. But the question is, when you have 2 smaller boards that are 18 to 24 inches, how big of a final board will they make? Well, if you're cutting 1.5 inch sections out of an 18-inch board, that means that you're going to have 2 boards that are each 12 inches, or 24 inches total. However, you also lose about 1/8 to 1/12 of an inch every time you make a cut. So for every 8 to 12 cuts, you're going to lose 1 more inch. What that means is you'll end up with a final board around 20 inches and 1/2 inch wide. Okay, enough math. Our first board is a walnut center with Bubinga red highlights. I cut each board into 1.5 inch strips using a stop block and a crosscut sled on my table saw. This gave me clean and consistent cuts each time. Once they were both cut, I turned the sections on the end to expose the end grain and integrated the pieces. I then glued it up, clamped it together, and let it dry. On these boards, I generally try to pick a single type of wood to go down the center, and I try to make sure that the center wood is different widths. This gives variation and avoids the problem of trying to line up the center wood in perfect alignment. I'll show you that in a board later today. After the glue dried, I sanded it down, rounded the edges, and my favorite part, soaked it in food-grade mineral oil. Note, do not use mineral spirits. The oil bath is when you first get to see the real colors of the wood exposed. Beautiful. The second board is a bloodwood center with walnut, cherry, and maple highlights, and with an ash outer layer. You'll notice that on most of these boards, I used the same flip pattern on each side of the center wood. This will make the final pattern the same on each side. You do not have to design your boards like this. You can randomize the pattern if you like, but on this set of boards, I really like the symmetry. The third board is a Bubinga center with lots of darker walnut and a few small purple heart and maple highlights. This was one of my favorites, although the original 2 boards were only about 12 inches, so the final end-grain board was much smaller than the others. Nevertheless, the red Bubinga really stood out, especially when surrounded by the striking walnut. Our fourth board is a canary wood board. This was my first time using canary wood, and I will definitely be looking to use more of it in future projects. Canary wood is absolutely gorgeous and has gorgeous yellow, light yellow to dark yellow to orangish grains. Unlike the others, you'll notice I offset the canary wood from the center. The center in this one is a maple, with the canary wood being just off center. Even without having the canary directly down the bottom, I think it still came out great. And it shows you an example of using a highlighted wood offset from the center. Our fifth board is well, honestly, I don't recall what wood that is in the middle. One of the drawbacks of buying from a cutoff section is I cut off the name of the wood during the build, and I forgot to write it down. Oh well, this board does show an issue that I raised earlier. The center wood, as you can see, is supposed to be the same width on all of the combined boards. Unfortunately, even though I tried to align it, I did not get it lined up perfectly. And as such, if you look at it, there is a stepping effect between the cross cuts. Even so, I like the highlights of this one. The sixth board is a wang board. Wingy. Somebody smarter than me can tell me how to pronounce it. However it's pronounced, it is one of the very few dark hardwoods I've found. Although it is beautiful, it can have large gaps in the grain, even after sanding. I would use it sparingly going forward for cutting boards, even with the beauty of the grain. As you are making these boards, you will invariably have strips left over. They might have had a small defect, they might have been a little wider or thinner than the other pieces, but in any instance, you will notice that you have a bunch of these tiny pieces left over. What I did is I pulled a number of these pieces and created a board out of them. Actually, I created two boards out of them, and I call these lovingly the pixel boards, simply because they had little rhyme or reason to their patterns. The sizes were also much smaller, since I had to trim them to the smallest crosscut piece of wood. However, this is a great way to make sure that the wood that would otherwise gather sawdust in your garage finds happiness in a cutting board. Well, that's it for today. Hope you found a board you liked, or at least learned something useful. Feel free to post any questions you might have, and like and follow me as I have some full builds coming soon. Until next time, cut wood, not fingers.